Hey, back again. I'm just bringing the page up here, and we should be able to get going. I had lost my connection on the last video. Just give me 2 seconds here. I'm sorry. I'm going to start this live over. My last live crashed, and sorry about that. But I want to get right into it here. This is about the 7, actually more like 8, 9 places that I was given that the land might be by viewers when I did my video on Jerusalem and where is Jerusalem. Sorry about the plane going by. It'll be gone in a minute. But that's life in Mexico outside. So I want to go to, we're going to use Aristeas, the Book of Jubilees, and the Old Testament and the New Testament to go through. And I'm going to start from scratch. For any of you who are watching my video that crashed just about an hour ago, you might want to start in about 40 minutes. But I had some really important stuff about Aristeas that I figured out and I wanted to share, and about Jerusalem at the end. And then my computer crashed. I had to start all over again. Anyway, I hope that this will work out for you and that you can enjoy it this time. Hopefully it'll work. So again, I'm going to start from scratch here. The mountains and elevation criteria. So in using the Book of Jubilees, and especially the letter of Aristeas and the New Testament, Old Testament, but especially the Old Testament, there are a lot of verses that talk about Jerusalem as being lifted up and beautiful in appearance and huge and that kind of thing. And yet when we're in Jerusalem today and we see what archaeologists are doing, they're finding a place in the time of King David and Solomon, which was only about 700 people living there at the time. And the issue with that is that it says that it was built on a mountain, not a hill, beautiful in elevation, or Mount Zion. In Psalm 125, it says surrounded by mountains. Other mountains nearby, like Nebo, Pisgah, Carmel, Hermon. And yes, I know in the land of that we call the Holy Land today, I know that they have these places named, but they're not in around Jerusalem, and they're not really big mountains at all. Only one of them is even a slightly decent size. But when you compare them to mountains in North America, or mountains in South America, or mountains in Asia, or mountains in Africa, they're barely hills. So the scriptures are quite clear that this is a place of mountains. And we read with King David about the Jebusites when David was trying to take the city. They ended up taking it by hiding with, and people not being able to find them and that kind of thing. But the issue is, it's very fascinating that we don't see. So as I'm going to do this video, I want you to think about it. For you that are watching it from Africa, most people already that watch my channel already realize that the Levant, or Jerusalem, that we have today is not the real Jerusalem, so to speak. But the issue that I want to bring out is that as you are trying to sort out in your life and try to figure out where Jerusalem might be, like I said, I have viewers that feel it's in West Africa, 2 places in Ethiopia, Yeha and Axum. We have Kenya and Mount Kenya area. We have Sudan area. We have viewers, Babel, I can't remember the name of the place. Anyway, we have the Tbilisi Mountains up in North Africa that some people believe. We have West Africa. We have the Democratic Republic of Congo that I've been given. I've been given Namibia, and I've been given Lesotho, and the Rwenzori Mountains in Tanzania, that area. And so you see that there's all of these people, and it's wonderful that we're trying to search where the true Jerusalem might be. But I think when we get right down to it, we really have to look at the evidence. So what I've done is I've pulled together 4 of my videos that I've done so far and on Jerusalem and all the different parts of it, whether it's Josephus or the letter of Aristeas or the Old Testament, and put them all together. And I used AI, I used Copilot to bring them all together and pick out all the factors that we've discussed and that you've commented on, and then try to put it into a logical framework where we can look at every piece of evidence of what is Jerusalem. And if you can think of others as I'm going through this that I've missed, please add them. I'd love to hear from you, as I always do. So built on a true mountain, surrounded by mountains, other mountains nearby. So when we look at the Levant today, it's just on a regular level piece of land, the Jerusalem. It is not the Jerusalem of King David. And when the archaeologists only find a ruin of 700 people and no palaces, no nothing, and we know that King David and Solomon had these massive palaces, massive amounts of wives and concubines, and 1.5 million man army, and we find this teeny place of Jerusalem that was supposed to be impregnable, that even King David wasn't supposed to be able to attack and win, but he did. But then do we go, there's an issue here. Of course, the Levant was made by Rome as a place for the new Christians in 325 AD to go and have like a resort, a place that they could go and worship and honor. But it wasn't the original Jerusalem that Rome destroyed 300 years earlier in 70 AD, where they dug it down to the foundation, to every foundation, not just the temple. Josephus says that every foundation in the city was dug up, as I suppose they were looking for their gold and all that type of thing and silver. But the Romans dug it up, so there was no city left except for a couple of walls, not walls, but towers to a wall were left up, and that's it. And that was 2,000 years ago, more or less. And so then we find, where is the real Jerusalem? Where is it? And I think it's wonderful that we're all looking. It'd be nice to know. I think it's wonderful if we are all looking. But so the first thing we have to look at is the mountains. The number two is the water systems and the hydrology of the place. Meaning, in the letter of Aristeas, especially, but also in the Old Testament, it talks about these wells and springs. But Aristeas, who wrote about being there, he was a Greek ambassador. He was likely Jewish background, but he went from Alexandria in Egypt about 250 before Christ. He went to Jerusalem, and he wrote in a letter what he saw there and what happened on his trip as they were getting people ready to do the Septuagint and have the 70 translators translate the Jewish writings, the Hebrew, Aramaic script into Greek that we have today. But it has to have a massive natural spring inside the temple, and not just a little bit of a spring. Aristeas says the water was gushing out because they were literally killing. There were 500 priests working there when he was there and watched it, and they're killing thousands of animals. So washing the water away, gushing springs. And then they had to have underground reservoirs. It says 5 furlongs long, so miles long. They were taking the water from the Temple Mount away underground and putting it out into the regular, rivers of the area. But it was a major, major undertaking with the waterworks. So the city in Psalms 46 was gladdened by rivers, and that isn't the Jerusalem of today at all, right? Region well watered on every side is what Aristeas wrote about the land of Judea. The Jordan River must be large, it must be deep, it must be dangerous. We read of the miracles that happened with the Jordan. I've done a video on that if you want to look at it. But the Jordan River doesn't have to be right in Jerusalem, but it has to be in the area. It has to be in the vicinity, as do all the things, whether it's all the things we read about, whether it's King David going to all these different places, and Solomon and Gideon and Moses and Joshua, and all the dividing of the lands and the names of the different places, Gibeon, all the different, and also the names of the people that lived in the area. This was a huge area with a lot of people around, and millions of people. So this, as we look and try to find these sites that were biblical sites, I don't believe any of them are going to have the actual name that was originally there. Now, it's possible that there's one or two that do. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm saying we're after 2,000 years, names change, like Lake Victoria, or any of the places that you look at. Even in even Lake Victoria actually had 3 or 4 different names depending on the tribe who was talking about the lake. But look at New York City or Washington, D.C. or Paris or all these different places. If we go back 2,000 years ago, is that what they were called? No, of course not. They weren't even built, most of those places. And so it has to have salt wastelands, not just wastelands that David talked about and going by. It has to have a salt sea, which, if you're looking at Lake Turkana in Kenya, Lake Tana in Ethiopia, I know South Africa, all the way down the Rift Mountain or Rift region of the eastern part of Africa, there are salt lakes and salt areas, but that's one thing that kind of has to be in the tail as well. And then freshwater reeds of the Yamsuf. The next thing is the agriculture and the herd capacity. And I sometimes think we overlook this when we're looking at the Bible. I think we sometimes overlook it, that they had olive groves, they had thick olive groves, they had rich cereal crops and abundant agriculture. They had honey in abundance, a land flowing with milk and honey. And we'll get into what that really means in a minute. But a land flowing, I mean, a beautiful land. Canaan stole the land, as it said in Jubilees, but it has to be a beautiful land, a large land full of animals, tons of animals, large pastures for cattle. This is what Aristeas said, that the land was incredible, and they had large herds, large groups of cattle and flocks of all goats and all the different animals, sheep, the different animals that we expect to have it in a pastoral landscape. Huge herds for sacrifices. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the Bible, we read of them. We read of Job and these massive amount of herds that always were part of the African experience. It's nice to see somebody come back. Somebody came back. Oh, Rodrigo here. So I lost my transmission. I lost my computer, ran out of power. Okay, so I want to get back to this, and I went through the animals. This is the thing that really made me aware that the Bible lands of the Levant are not the lands of the Bible, right? They're not there. Couldn't have been in the Levant. They don't have these animals. In the past, people say, oh, yeah, there was the odd lion or there was the odd hyena in the area, but they didn't have ostrich. They didn't have peacocks. They didn't have hyenas, jackals, no crocodiles, no wild oxen, no wild asses, which probably is a zebra, wild oxen, mammoth beasts, leviathan, all the things that are mentioned in the Bible, as the animals, they did have those things as well. Aristeas is very clear that Judea was 60 million acres or 93,000 square miles, about the size of Colorado. Many nations surrounding Judea, so 20 to 30 nations. We were, and I think we don't think about that. I think everybody wants to be Israel in Africa and everywhere. Everybody wants to be part of the 12 tribes. And I'm going like just around the area, wherever you put in your mind that Jerusalem is, wherever that might be, we have to accommodate all these other peoples, the Moabites, the Ishmaelites, the Midianites, the Cushites, of course, the Egyptians and all those groups, but the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Midians, the Ammon, and the Jebusites, the Hittites. So all of these different groups are living around wherever the land of Israel is. Now, the time 250 years before Christ, when Aristeas is in the land, he says that it was about 93,000 square miles, which is less than half the size of Kenya today in looking at Africa as a whole. So I know these are colonial boundaries, but 93,000 square miles is not a huge area. It's big in a sense. It's like I said, it's the size of Colorado, but it's not the size of a tiny place like Delaware, but it's also not the size of the Levant, which is absolutely teeny, 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 teeny place. So many nations surrounding Judea and many millions of people surrounding Judea. And I made the point, I'll make this point again, that wherever we place this nation, let's say it's the size at the greatest extent of the size of Israel when Aristeas was there 250 years before Christ. So if we went back another 500 years, the time of David and that time, maybe the land was larger. That would be fine. But I don't believe it was all of Africa. I believe it was within an area, maybe the size of South Sudan, bits of part of Ethiopia, big chunk of Kenya, that kind of thing. And if that's where it was. But if you think it was in Namibia, then Namibia, right? Or if you think it was in Ethiopia, Ethiopia. But there were peoples living in West Africa and peoples living in North Africa and peoples living in South Africa and people living all over the place, all through the Congo where I mean, there's just multiple nations even today, and these are large nations. As I said in Aristeas' time, what he saw as Judea when he was there was about the size of not even half of Kenya of today. So we're not talking this all of Africa. We're talking this one land, and then around this land, around this land would be the people of the Bible, the other tribes, the other groups, whether they be Canaanites or whether they be other Shemite groups around the land. Hey, good to see you back. It's kind of funny. Just it is what it is. That's life of using technology. Okay. Anyway, so I want to keep going here. So, and like I said, if you've already seen this, because I'm redoing this because I lost my feed, but come back in about 20 minutes. I should be through all what we covered before. But we have to have all the parts of the Bible, and I want to bring in here, and I did in my last feed before it died, is that we have to learn to see as a little child. If we really want to find not just the things of the Savior, he said we have to become as a little child, and few will find the way because our egos get in our way and make it very difficult. Just one sec. And so our egos get in the way, and it makes it very difficult for us to be able to see ourselves that we are putting our own judgments on things, right? It's like when I have people ask me, well, what about Paul, right? And I'm going, well, I always say, well, I think that's a decision each person has to make. But for me, when I take my lenses, my glasses, and you know, and I open them up and I try to go, okay, I really want to see if I'm basing my faith on the words of Jesus, then wouldn't I put 95% or 100%? Okay, here's the words of Jesus. Now, are they perfect in the New Testament? I don't believe so. I believe has come through men and all that. That's fine. But when I read them, I can still see that there are the words of Jesus there. I can feel, for me, when I read the Sermon on the Mount or whatever, it strikes me that I can feel that that is the word that's true. And when I read the Gnostic text, Gospel of Thomas and Mary Magdalene and all those things, it strikes me brutally hard that no, that's Gnosticism and other stuff. And each person still has to work it out themselves. But when I read Paul and I read the gospel, it isn't the same. They're not the same. And I know people excuse away all kinds of stuff, but I'm going to be doing a video this week on this issue because to me it's fascinating that about women, for instance. Like Jesus, the woman at the well, he didn't tell her to go home and cover her head and go home and ask her husband for information. He talked to her directly and actually sent her away to the town to bring back all the people. He knew he came for her. Or Mary Magdalene, the first person that was seen of the resurrected Savior, right? And Mary and Martha and all the different people sitting at his feet and learning and being taught. And then we have Paul saying, very much like the Pharisee, which he was, and saying a completely different thing. So who do we choose, right? So each person has to decide. But as we look at the scriptures, I do believe we have to use discernment. But I think we have to come at it as a little child. And I think it comes to finding Jerusalem or finding anything about truth. We have to be able to put our own ego, our own position over here. And for the 99% of the people in the world that believe the Levant is the Holy Land, well, that's really hard to put that aside. When I saw that it wasn't, it was hard at first to go, okay, what? But I saw that the animals of the Bible were not there, and I'm going like, yeah, that makes. Once I started looking, and then I looked at Josephus, and I looked at the different things, I started making the videos. Then I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, it became obvious. The more you study, the more obvious it becomes. And then in that one thing, I can start to see more as a little child. I can put my old thinking over here and my new thinking over here. And I think for most of us who've been fooled by the media and the lies that we get all through our lives, we're told this, and then it turns out it's over here. Well, then I think we get jaded. But when I think if we really want to find truth, we've got to come at it as a little child. So wherever you might be in Africa or America or wherever you might be, for us to find out where the true Jerusalem is, because I believe there was only one place. I do believe it existed. So let's assume that. But if it's not found, then where is it? But it can't be in 11 different places any more than there can be 55,000 different churches all following the one true path. There's either one or there's none, right? If there's one, there's one. If there's none, there's none. I can accept either way, but I can't accept there's two churches or four and they're all following the same path, but they're not, because they all do different things differently. No, so there's problems. When you get to 55,000 churches, there's multiple problems. So try to come at this if you can. Look at the stuff. Go read the things I have, or go back and look at these things. Go study it for yourself and try to picture all of the factors. At the end, I'm going to go through all the factors at once and try to eliminate some of the places, and then give a little bit more hints of what we should be looking for. So the port cities like Joppa, Ascalon, and Gaza, remember, it doesn't have to be the Gaza of today. Just because that has Gaza is the same as Jerusalem or Jericho, whereas we know the walls of Jericho never existed in the time of Moses. So the Jericho is not the real Jericho, and the Jerusalem only had 700 people in a village with no palaces, no nothing. So either the Bible is a lie and a myth, or else Jerusalem isn't the real place. And so Gaza might be easily on the Indian Ocean towards Kenya, or could be down further south towards Madagascar. We don't know, or Joppa in these places. The Jordan River, it irrigates large parts of the land, means it overflows its banks and irrigates the land. Then I want to look at part 6 is city infrastructure and population. So the city circumference of 40 furlongs, or about 6 to 7 miles. That's a big city in the day. It's a big city even in our day now. The temple walls 70 cubit feet high, 500 priests working simultaneously. This is from Aristeas, the letter of Aristeas. Thousands of sacrifices in a single feast. Solomon's entire wealth beyond measure that we read about in the Bible. Gold mines being nearby. And so we read about this city that is huge, and then when they dig up the ruins of Jerusalem in the Levant, they find there were 700 people there living there, and nothing to show for what's in the Bible. And so people, of course, we have a struggle, is the Bible right or is it not? Welcome to all of you that have found your way back. Yeah, I know a lot of people think it's North America. I'll show in a minute what the scriptures and what the things do say about that, right? And yeah, Jordan derives from the ancient Semitic Hebrew name meaning descending or flowing down. Yeah, that would make sense. And yes, the Colorado River has been dwindling. I am going to do some videos on America. To me, it's almost more fascinating than Africa, but America is a very, very difficult one, because I believe it's been a land where people have been brought to, tons of people. The Mayan ruins actually connect much more to Asia, the Thailand area, than they do the Israel or Africa area. They find Africa, the Olmecs are very African looking people. So there were people coming to the Phoenicians, I believe, were probably here too. I believe lost tribes probably came here. I believe people came here after the breakup of the Tower of Babel, because we don't really think about it much, right? But imagine the people at the Tower of Babel, where Shem, Ham, and Japheth, they knew the old world, as did Noah. So even though they may have gone up in one place and landed in another, and I don't believe they landed in Turkey, by the way, it doesn't really matter. But wherever they landed doesn't mean that's where they left. They could easily have left from America and landed in Africa, or they could left from Africa and landed in Africa, or they could anywhere. I mean, they were on the ocean for quite a long time, and then when they were settled, I guess the Father put them where He wanted them to be. But America has old ruins. We see mummies in Peru in those areas, ancient mummies. We see skeletons that in the old papers from 200 years ago, skeletons in America, 7, 8, 15 feet high skeletons dug up, and all hidden away, of course, and taken away by the Smithsonian and stuff. But we see these things and you go, yeah, that's fascinating. But that doesn't make America, just because it's old, just as old as the old world, doesn't mean that it is where the Bible took place. But it does mean, in my opinion, there were tribes here. I mentioned this in my last live before it fell apart. But when the early explorers came here, the first ones, I've searched through about 10 of the different ones, whether they're Portuguese or Spanish and also English. When they came here, they lived among, they didn't live at the very beginning, but some of them ended up living among the native peoples, right? We have William Penn from Pennsylvania. He lived among the native peoples. He got the whole of Pennsylvania given to him to settle a debt by the king in England, but he lived among the native peoples, right? That's a fascinating story anyway, how he was told, yeah, as far as a person can go in a day, you can have as far west as someone can run. So he hired all these Indians to space native people to space themselves out, and they could run in 24 hours. So that's why Pennsylvania is so large and long. He was a tricky dude. But anyway, he wrote to his friend that he lived among the natives, and he felt that their traditions were, he considered Hebrew or Jewish traditions. And there's another fellow, I can't remember his name right now, but he married and lived among the natives in southeast USA. Because because the natives we consider the Navajo and the people out west, yes, they may have come from Asia. They may have come from however, by boat or however they got the land bridge, doesn't really matter. But that doesn't mean the people in the eastern US were the same as the ones in the western US. Not at all. The eastern US, in my opinion, the people they found, these early explorers, they said they looked like Africans or like Ethiopians. They weren't, long straight hair. They looked like Africans. And then of course, but they said there were different shades too. There were some that were just like Africans, others that were in the middle and more brown or ruddy, and then others were whiter looking or fairer skinned, all through. And which makes sense, because if you look at the tribes in the western part of the U.S. or Canada, they have a different skin tone than what I assume to be the Seminoles in Florida. So there's these differences, but we want this one little history that'll just have everybody look alike and all from one place, and it isn't. It's never so simple. Yeah, I mean, yes, America could easily be the lands of Noah, absolutely, but not, I believe, where Noah landed with his sons. That's I mean, if you follow the Bible, it doesn't fit America. I mean, I know people are saying it does, and there's Egypt in ruins, possibly in the Grand Canyon and all that kind of thing. But there have been writings that, even the Micmac writing, where I'm from in Eastern Canada, the Micmac writing looks like Paleo Hebrew. Absolutely. The letters some are identical. So yeah, there's things going on in the Americas. People were coming here, but does that mean that it's the Bible lands? No, I don't think so. For me, each has their own choice on that one. Yes, many Native American people follow Hebrew traditions. Yeah, I mean, they had a stone. I think you guys have seen that. I think it's called the Bat Creek Stone, where it was displayed in the Smithsonian or in another museum. I think it was Smithsonian for quite a long time, saying, "Oh, this is Native Indian writing." And the guy that was a Hebrew or a Aramaic, whatever translator, he said he went and said, "Yeah, let's just flip that over. Oh, look, it's in Hebrew." And then they took the stone down off display because they couldn't have that narrative. I mean, that would just that would be a problem, right? Yeah. And so, but even the thing about the gopher wood and all that, you can't just, like I said, if we're gonna think like a little child, you got to use all the evidence, not just one thing. What they call gopher wood 4,000, 5,000 years ago, and what we call gopher wood, I think you have to, those things, it doesn't even matter, even the corn issues and all those kind of things. They're good things to look at, absolutely. But if people are going back and forth between the continents, which they were, because we find, I think I'll do this in another video, but get into this. But in Michigan, the huge copper mines, they're finding the copper from there over in Europe and other places. So they were mining copper in Michigan, sending it down the Mississippi, I suppose, all the way to New Orleans area, and then shipping it overseas. I mean, we just don't know what was going on in the old world, right? We just don't. Let me see if you guys have any questions. Yeah, you're right. There is a stone, I think it's called I just watched something on that a couple weeks ago again. Anyway, it's out west somewhere. There's a stone with all the 10 commandments on it. Yeah, the Decalogue stone. Yeah. Yeah, I've seen that. And I believe that. I believe there's a lot more. You have to understand how much they have destroyed. I mean, there were huge city ruins. You can go back, there were thousands and thousands of cities ruins in the Americas. You know, the wall, I mean, they had the where they built the walls on the barriers around. The wood, of course, was gone, but where they elevated the land. I mean, like I think it's Kansas City was called Mound City was called. It had a mound. It took them years, but they destroyed that mound down to nothing. So yeah, they didn't want the same as when they went into Africa. They couldn't accept that Africans could have ruins like Meroe and that's why they made the Egyptians look white, right? They want them to be Mediterranean. They didn't want them to be African. So they wouldn't anything they found in Benin and all these different places. They wouldn't accept that it was Africans that built them. It had to be someone else from outside, because in order for them to take the land and take the resources and take the land, they had to have the people be, instead of being where they were, the head, they had to put them down to the tail so they could take their, and they did the same in America. They came to America, they wanted the land. I mean, where were most of the tribes in America when the first settlers came? Most of the tribes were where you grow most of the food, right? Just look at a map of America. They weren't living out in Wyoming. I mean, it doesn't mean there weren't a few native tribes out in the Dakotas and stuff, but the bulk of the people living in the Americas were living east of the Mississippi, right? You know, and so they got rid of them or merged them by changing them from native Indian into colored into Negro and changed them that way, right? So yeah, there's a lot of things going on there. And so I'm going to get back. I think what I'll probably try to do is merge this live. After it's done, I will merge it with the other one that I have and see if I can put it out together. What a mess when I lost my computer. Yeah, that's okay. That's life. So back at her here. Travel time and international interaction. Okay, so as I said with Aristeas, you know, he traveled from Egypt down to Jerusalem weeks, not months. So he didn't travel all the way to South Africa. He would have, if he was going to do that, I think he would have had the Phoenicians take him by boat, right? There was trade going on between China, India, even back then. That they find it's a lot more complex than we are led to believe, and so we understand that this letter of Aristeas, how key it is to understanding really about Jerusalem because it talks about it and what he saw, but also where it might be. He, of course, does not put a pin on the map and say it was right here, but there's a lot of things you can read in there. The elephants, well, he certainly didn't go to Levant because there were no elephants, but he talks about the elephants in his letter. So the destruction criteria, I think this is crucial when we're talking about Jerusalem. It was destroyed down to the last stone, just as Jesus said. When the Romans were done with it, as Josephus said, you couldn't tell a human had ever lived there. There was nothing left. They only left a tower or two, and that was it. The city was gone. So the city that was 4, 5, 6, 7 miles across, destroyed down to the foundation. So it could be just a field today, covered up, and you'd never know it was ever there. In Micah, it says, a city plowed like a field. Jerusalem becomes heaps in Micah, a haunt of jackals in Jeremiah, no human habitation in Jeremiah, taking its Sabbaths, all that kind of things. So, and okay, we've discussed that. The wilderness and Exodus. The wilderness in Exodus, and I did a video yesterday, I think I put it out on this. They had animals with them so they could do their sacrifices of the law of Moses for the 40 years they were in the wilderness. And they also had to do Passover and all those things. So they had their flocks and herds, as every wandering tribe in Africa has. They keep their animals, and I've had quite some good comments about this, that animals are not generally killed. They're used for milk and those kind of things. And yes, if there's a sacrifice, they use them for that. But other than that, they're guarded as a treasure, right? They're maintained and cared for because they are, in a sense, their livelihood, right? They need the animals. So when we saw that thing with the fish, in the scriptures where Moses fed them, had them have fish for 30 days until they couldn't stand another fish, kind of thing. So for 40 years they wandered in this wilderness, but it had that, wherever that wilderness was, it had to have grasslands for the animals, manna from the people, but it had to have grasslands, and it had to have water for the people and the animals. Because really, we only read of miracles of manna for the humans for the food. Water a couple of times in 40 years is mentioned. That's it. Another thing you might want to think about is, what were they doing for the 40 years to arm themselves, right? Because they came out of Egypt. Most of them weren't warriors, I don't believe. That's not what they were doing. Moses was a warrior, maybe a few others were. But did they take out all kinds of arms out of? Maybe. But I think they must have mined, or they must have gotten access to be able to make weapons, because when they went down into Sudan area or Kenya, or went into the land of Canaan, they had to have been armed. So for 40 years, they were probably doing some things. And we know that in Africa, there are great, great metallurgy, making things with metals. And so it has to be a vast area. They were wandering for 40 years, because for that, all the people and all the cattle and all the sheep and all the herds, they had to be moving with the rains and the seasons so their animals could be fed, because there were still wild animals up in that area as well. The issue, I'll just raise this one more time. The issue with the Levant is huge. They travel around in this little spin around for 40 years in one 200-mile area of the Sinai that we call it today. Because remember, names change. Just that doesn't mean it's the Negev desert or the Sinai or any of that. That all Jericho, Jerusalem, any names aren't really very useful. Rivers and mountains are very useful, and plains and things that they don't change that much. But the issue is with the Levant, you can look it up on the maps, it was part of Egypt. It was under Egyptian control completely, with garrisons and forts. And that was their trade route to go up to Turkey and that area. That was their land trade route. They had sea trade routes, but that was their land trade route. So to put the Levant there and say that David, with his 1.5 million man army, was living there, and the Egyptians never mention it, no wars, no nothing, it doesn't make any sense. Why would they have allowed them to come back into the land? So once you start thinking like as a little child, you go, yeah, that doesn't make sense. The hard part of thinking like a little child, of course, is that the ramifications, that if you take your pin out of the Levant and Palestine in that area today, and you have no place to put the pin, that means cognitive dissonance. It means I don't know. I'm unsure. I'm lost. I'm hurt. I have no idea what to do. And that's where it gets very difficult. So most people go back to, no, I just want to deal with it. I'll believe it's there in the Levant, and I can't deal with it because I can't have this. We don't know where Jerusalem is, and we don't know who the people are, or even finding out that the people might be Africans, and go like, for a lot of Anglo-Saxons, a lot of Europeans, it would be very difficult to accept that the Bible people are the Africans, which to me makes more sense than anything else, because I cannot see my own people of the European background as being the people of the Bible. Like, when I think of the people, not the wicked ones when they turned wicked, but when I think of the good ones, I think of African type people, right? Spirit, like Abraham and Jacob and Joseph. I think of African people who are spiritual, kind, and calm, and not warmongering, right? I think because Japheth took the land up in the north, they had continual war for the last 4 or 5 thousand years because of trade, different climates, different when the what do you call it, a famine and that kind of thing, moved people. So there was this constant shifting of people, of wars and intrigue and difficulties. So the Gentiles became a very hardened Roman Greek type people and Gauls and all that. Whereas I think the Shemites that were living in Africa, in let's call it the colonial term sub-Saharan Africa, or the grand Ethiopia of old. So when they were living there, they were fairly stable. Yes, there was Bantu migration and things, but basically very stable, rural, semi-rural, or even some cities now, of course, but a very stable place. And the Hamite people in the North Africa, they're living along rivers, especially the Nile in those areas, and they formed into city-states, of course, to maintain their power and have walls and cities and armies and that kind of thing. But you don't see the Egyptians out conquering in China, right? Or Afghanistan like the Greeks, or going to like the Romans up into Britain and Gaul. No, you see Egypt stay huge, running the world, but from a central spot. But they didn't need to go conquering all over the world to like they are. Much like China, they can control the whole world more or less now, but they still have they live within their area. They aren't like the U.S. with 280 bases all over the world. So next thing is the Apocrypha and the Jubilees clues. And I've gone over this, but I'll just quickly say with the Jubilees, you really get an idea that the land of Shem was the best land. It was the top land. And if we take the top land, the most milk and honey place in all of Africa, it's in the central area, the South Sudan, South Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, maybe even down in Tanzania, that area. That is like the breadbasket. That doesn't mean that all the other lands don't have, they have tons too. But that area, Kenya is the number one milk producing right now in all of Africa. And so this whole area there in the Great Lakes area and through there is maybe probably why Canaan wanted to steal that land. It makes sense to me. It also makes sense in my video where they went from the Bantu, if you want to call it, or the Ibu and the Yoruba, all those groups went before they split into all their different groups. I believe they came from the Tower of Babel, just south of Egypt, and they couldn't go into the land of Canaan, which would be, in my opinion, somewhere in the Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda area, that area, maybe further south if you believe that. But they went to West Africa. And why? Because it was still their land, but they couldn't go take the center, the heart of their land. They had to go take the second best or third best part of their own land, and then migrated down into South Africa, which is still Shemite land, with the Khoisan and the Pygmies, of course, in their little areas. But understand that Shem's land was, as it says, neither hot nor cold. So Canaan stole that land, which had mountains and rivers, and as I said, it was supposed to contain the Garden of Eden, that kind of thing. So it was a great land. And then I said that there were some clues about the Jerusalem's geography based on the New Testament. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Well, Jerusalem of today is not really on a hill. It's just on a rolling bunch of little hills. Massive crowds during the feasts. People traveled there from Jerusalem for the feasts, of course. And Josephus described, millions came to the city at the time. And of course, we have the wild beasts. I didn't really get into that, but of course, we know that the Bible's full of these beasts, of prophets being killed by lions, and the ostrich. Isaiah talks about the ostriches, and Lamentations talks about the owl, all the different animals of the Bible. But the additional clues that I'd mentioned, large valleys with salt wastelands. Abraham went up the Nile, in my opinion, up in altitude and south. That's what it says in Genesis, out of Egypt with Lot and his wife, Abraham's wife. The Greek emissary, he implies proximity of the land of Jerusalem, but that he had to travel a long way to get there. So having a large agricultural base, and the Philistines, who were basically, whether it's coastal on the sea or coastal on a large lake, the Philistines have to be fairly nearby, because there are wars between the Israelites and the Philistines, of course, as there are with other groups as well. And Jerusalem must be near Cush. I want to bring that out again. Cush features a lot in the Bible. Canaan the most of all the brothers of Ham. And then after that, it would be Cush. And then Egypt, only because Egypt was where they came in the Exodus down. But after that, Egypt is hardly mentioned other than alliances. Cush is mentioned more. So the question is, does your proposed Jerusalem, if you believe in any of those 10 different places in Africa, does it fit all the criteria or just some of them? Because I think that is an issue. I thought this was fascinating. I'm just going to go over it briefly because I'm going to hopefully I can merge these two live streams together. The Nile, when Aristeas left Alexandria in 250 BC before Christ to go visit Jerusalem, he was traveling, they say in those days, would have been about 25 to 37 miles when they're going up the Nile in boats in those days. So they would go by water when they could because it was faster. And then they would get on to camels, whether they hired them out or whatever. So after they got to where they needed to get to, then to get to Jerusalem, they had to go by land. And if it was 2 weeks, about 500 miles is all you could go if you're going by camel. People didn't walk in those days on foot generally. So it would be by camel or by caravan. And so the radius we're looking at, if you take Alexandria in Egypt down in the lower Nile area where I believe Alexandria was, and you go 500 miles, then you could go up to Turkey. Levant is only a short distance away, so that doesn't count. You could go down to Mecca, maybe you could go down to Arabia. You could go all the way to Yemen, of course, but that's still much closer. But yeah, you could go down to Eritrea, Somalia. You could go to, of course, Ethiopia, Sudan, South Sudan, just do that circle around. But it does eliminate some places as being a little bit far for where this Aristeas likely went. And I made the point before that if he could have traveled by sea, because the Greeks did have places along the Indian Ocean, along the African continent, almost all the way to South Africa. And so if he needed to go to someplace along the Indian Ocean, he would have gone by boat through the Red Sea and then by boat down the Indian Ocean. So he was going to an internally landlocked place if he was traveling by land. So if we take Aristeas' journey of 2 to 3 weeks, the real Jerusalem must be within roughly 500 to 800 kilometers or 310 to 500 miles away from where the Greek rulers were centered in Alexandria. And I've already mentioned this would include, so let's move on here. What falls outside that radius? Namibia, Lesotho, West Africa, and most of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And so that matters, right? They had to, and even the Tbilisi Mountains up in North Africa, again, would he have gone down the Nile? Which way would Aristeas have gone to get to Jerusalem? If it was way over in the Berber area and out in North Africa, then he probably would have gone through the Mediterranean and down if that's where it was. So we have to try to use those things, right? So all these clues so far, they don't tell us where, but they do tell us sort of within an area to possibly look. That's the highest likelihood based on Aristeas and what we read from the Old Testament about these things, where it could be. Then we have to bring in that it is near the land of Cush. We have to bring in the Jordan River. We have to bring in Sea of Galilee. We have to bring in all the things that are mentioned in the Old Testament, not just Jerusalem itself proper, but all the things that are mentioned around and all the geographical places, and bring them all and try to put them in a pot and go, does everything fit here? I can bring up the Sea of Galilee because that's an issue. I don't know which of the sea. I did a video on possibly Lake Victoria. Another person mentioned it could be about 4 other places they mentioned that are Tanganyika. There's a bunch of other huge lakes that are in, and of course Lake Chad was huge at the time too. But there's all these lakes, and some may even have dried up since then. But these are huge lakes. So when the waters came up and the fishermen were scared to death that have lived on the sea all their lives, then we have to look at a place that's bigger than the teeny little lake we call the Sea of Galilee today. People don't, in the last 100 years, no one has drowned from a storm. They've drowned, but not caused by waves in a boat, that kind of thing. With Aristeas, how do we determine the travel time? He traveled from Alexandria to Jerusalem. That's a diplomatic route, would have been known in the day. He traveled with gifts, scribes, and attendants, so they knew how to travel, and they would have gotten there as quickly as they were able to. They knew when they were getting there because they had feast days when he arrived. And when they traveled up the Nile and into Judea, it implies, of course, by Nile, by water, and then by camel, which I've already discussed. And then he describes why they were going there for the making of the Septuagint and the reasons there. But if we look at Ptolemaic administrative records, Greek diplomatic logs, and Egyptian trade route estimates, 1 to 3 weeks is the time normally taken for travel when they're going out as ambassadors in the area. That's kind of how they did it. Because remember, in this time, the Greek kingdom was also being broken up into different parts after Alexander as well. So I think we can skip this part here. Just quickly want to touch on the 12 hours a day. I touched on that on the last one. 12 hours in a day, it means the equator, right? I mentioned that I lived in Ecuador for a few years, and it was on the equator. And it was literally every day starts and ends on the same time all day. It never changes year round. The climate may change because of rainy and dry season, but that's it. It doesn't change the time. So in John 11, it says, verse 9, are there not 12 hours in the day? So if you're in New York City, there's more than 12 hours in the day. It's 14 or 15. If you're in Edmonton in Canada, it's 18 or 19, and some are only 8 or 9, depending on the time of year. So the equator is where you have 12 hours in the day. I think I'll take a break there for a second. And I just want to see if any of you guys have any questions. I'll take a minute and come back to the live and look at your questions here. So I'm not so good at this. I'm just still learning how to do this and having that problem today with the computer crashing. Sort of got my dander up a little bit. So, okay, you guys are going on about South North America. Oh, North Africa. Sorry, Metrosin North. Okay, yeah. Okay, pure mules are less common across much of sub-Saharan Africa compared to the mass deported populations of domesticated donkeys. Okay, good. Nobody knows for sure. I know that the Japheth fake Israelites. You know what? I think you guys know that, right? That they own a lot of land in South Africa. They in Kenya now and in Uganda. They actually tried to go to Uganda before they went to what we call the Holy Land today. They were in the late 1800s. They were going to go to Uganda, and the British were going to give them land there, and then they didn't go there. But anyway, be that as it may. So we are. I just want to, for you that have been been here and hanging in there, I want to give you my opinion on a couple things just to think about. I think people think that we're further along in the last days than we think we are. I think we're still. I like one person put down, the dry bones starting to shake. That's more or less what I think as well. I think we think that it's going to happen in a year or 2 or 5, and I think that there are there's two groups going on, right? There are the ones you were just talking about, and them and all their allies throughout all the nations. And I want to make this point too. So you have to understand that there's people that are African, there's people that are North American, that are African American. They're involved in the same societies that rule everything too. It's not just all the guys of my skin coloring that are doing this. It's every country, whether it's India, China, Russia, it's all through everywhere. It's a huge one that said that the sower went out and sowed his seed. That seed is sown throughout the whole world. It's not only in one place, right? And so just keep that in mind I think with Revelation, the book of Revelations, we focus so much on that and try to understand it, and almost nobody does, that we forget that we're a long way from that yet, right? Because when we read in Jeremiah, he talks about, in the gathering, he talks about the lost tribes coming back, and he's not doesn't talk about it in a way that it's just, oh, I found out I'm from Africa and I'm in this tribe, so I'm now part of one of these 12 tribes. No, that's not how they talk about it. They talk about it as an event greater. Jeremiah talks, and Isaiah, they talk about it as, we're talking world changing events, right? They talk about it. Isaiah says there'll be so few people left after the destructions and the wars and the troubles, that when the tribes come, he doesn't say the tribes, but he says the people will say, where did these come from? We lost all our children. So, and that's what Jeremiah sees. He sees these, he said, we won't even talk about Moses anymore because the miracles will be so great. So as these lost tribes come from wherever they're going to be then the 144,000 go out, then all the other events happen. So I think uh, just realize in your own study, just think about, that we aren't we aren't where we might think that we are, right? And then we can worry about just wakening up to living the Sermon on the Mount, living the commandments, and trying to get the dry bones and all awake. And I'm not considering myself part of the dry bones, but considering those that are trying to awaken. Are they wakening up to being Pharisees, or are they wakening up to being like the Messiah, that type of thing? Okay, any more questions here? I don't see any, so I'll go back to babbling on here. Okay, I've gone through this in the last live about where they could have gone, and I think I'll move on. I'll try to, maybe I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to merge these two lives together. It's just too hard doing it this way. My brain just doesn't work that way. Let's see if whatever I missed here at the end. Uh, okay, this is what I said to chat. Not to chat, but Pilot. I said, I want to end by telling them, my viewers, it is not a matter of proving right or wrong. Rather, come at information as a little child. Use all the facts. Do not excuse those that do not fit your own preconceived ideas. Allow the text or the text to tell us, and for us to be as a little child and be willing to look at all the evidence without ego or old beliefs and put it all to the test. It does not mean we can 100% prove it, but it does allow for the best evidence to show us where to look. So, yes, new evidence may come up, like when we see no walls in Jericho at a time of Joshua and Moses in Levant, or a Jerusalem without mountains, gushing springs, and a population of 700 with no palaces at the time of David and Solomon. What does ego cause in the Levant? They do not say, maybe we are looking in the wrong place. No, this is the scholars and everybody else and all the churches. They say the Bible is a myth, or they pretend to come up with, a lot of Christian people do that. They come up with this, oh yeah, this place and that place, we found such and such and such and such. And yet they ignore all the other evidence the archaeologists are coming up with. So they say the Bible is a myth, or else they come up with false little narratives to make up so much allegory. And that is exactly what happened with ego, why Jesus said, so few will find the way, and so few can be as a little child, so they will not seek, knock, or ask. And he talks about the blind leading the blind. And it says here, this can be maybe your most important part. And so I'll read what it came up with, because I think it more or less is what I want to go over anyway in a minute. It says, and I'm not family, but it's saying family, those that are at least people that are interested in this kind of thing. It's not about proving who is right or wrong. It's about learning to come at the text as a little child, the way Jesus said the kingdom is found. A child does not defend old traditions. A child does not protect ego. A child does not bury their head in the sand like an ostrich when something doesn't fit. A child simply looks honestly, openly, and humbly and lets the evidence speak. And that is all we are doing here. We are letting the text speak. The Bible, Josephus, Aristeas, Jubilees, and we are refusing to excuse the parts that don't fit the inherited map. So wherever you think your Jerusalem is, and that's where it is, please don't refuse to look at stuff that contradicts your viewpoint. Try to allow all the things, like I said, for me, being a Gentile or whatever from Canada, when I come at it and I'm going like, Oh yeah, the Levant's not true. That's not right. That means Jesus was African. That means they were African. Yeah, they're all African. The whole thing is African. The whole book is, that's fine. Yes, at first it was like, okay, I didn't have a big problem with it, but it was like that means your whole world. That's why I did the video I did on Babel and Babylon. Because once I realized, that's kind of how we have to think, once I realized that Jerusalem was likely in somewhere in Kenya and that area down there somewhere, then I'm going like, well, that means Babylon has to be down there because Egypt is like a cork to the continent of Africa. And if an army came from Babylon up in Mesopotamia, they'd have to go through Egypt to go down and get at the people that were the Israelites, or the Assyrians. They'd have to get the 10 lost tribes. They would have had to go through Egypt. So then you're going, okay, well, the Egyptian records don't show that. So that means if the Bible is in Africa, that means every place in the Bible. That means Syria. That means Gaza. That means Lebanon. That means everything that's mentioned in the Bible basically is in Africa, which means we don't, that's the problem with moving the pin of Jerusalem from the Levant to somewhere else. All the places have to, I mean, if they changed if the Romans basically hid and made a new Disneyland type of thing up in the Levant, that means they had to rename Syria, the Euphrates, the Tigris rivers. They had to rename everything. That means Noah landing in the Mount Ararat. When you start, it means that's why it's so hard for almost all people to start to look at it. It's very hard. It's very hard. It's very hard. And I think that's why the Savior was saying a little child, because for a little child, it wouldn't be hard at all because they don't have preconceived notions. It doesn't derive their whole worldview off a cliff. They just go, oh yeah, you show them. If I took 100 kids and took them to a zoo in wherever in the US or Canada or Europe or even in Africa. I took them to a zoo if there wasn't, I don't even know if Africa has their animals in zoos, but they probably do. But if I go to a zoo and I go to the children, so looking at these animals, the elephant, the zebra, the giraffe, the gazelles, the hyenas, the wild dogs, the peacocks, ostrich, crocodiles, and I said to them, where would I find, here's a map here, where would I point to where you think these animals came from? I think if they were in first or second or third grade or more, they're going to go, yeah, those are African. They would know that. My grandkids would know that Africa, that elephants are in Africa or India, right? They might know that tigers are in India, but they would definitely know lions are in Africa. They would know that leopards, maybe. They might not know all the little detailed animals, but hyenas, they would know that they're an African animal. And yet for us, we go, when I see people in my comment section, what are they saying? Oh no, there were hyenas 3,000 to 4,000 years ago in the Levant, or yeah, there's bones. They found bones of lions here and here and here, and I'm going like, but you're just taking that one animal out of all the animals, because if the animals are African, the only animal that we might not be able to find right now is a bear, but there were bears in the Atlas Mountains. North Africa had bears. So when the Sahara dried, did bears get driven down and die? We don't know. But the issue is the Bible describes a land, it describes a people, it describes, so it should fit within all the parameters. But it's the same when we're looking for, I think for my African American and African viewers, it's easy to say, yeah, okay, we know that we're the people, so that means Africa, that means Jerusalem's down here. But then starting to pick out which one is the Jerusalem, then it gets to be, oh, no, I'm Fulani, or I'm Igbo, or I'm Bantu, or I'm Yoruba, or I'm this, or I'm that. You know what? We have to be the ones, right? Rather than going, no, let's put it all on the table. I'm going to do a video about this, hopefully, but I'll just bring it up here that if we want to truly get to the rock that Jesus spoke about, if he said, if you build your house on the rock, well, how do we know when we get to the rock? In my opinion, you have to go down to be agnostic, or worse, not atheist, but you have to get down to, I will even allow that there is no God. I've got to test it all. Then Jesus, is that his name? Then we can test that when we go and know his name wasn't Jesus, it was Ishu or something else in his day, but the Greek translation, okay? But we have to go down and then I have to test Paul. Then I have to test the Old Testament Masoretic text against the Septuagint text. And then you go, whoa, there's huge differences. That means men were changing the Bible, because the Bibles we have are all based on the Hebrew fake text from the people you were talking about. So then you go, okay, well, that's a problem, right? So I think we have to be able to start to come at it and go, we have to, which is why I think the Savior said that he was, if you want to come to the truth, come to him. And he said the way to come to him is keep all the commandments in John 14. And if we keep all the commandments and work our butts off at doing that, he will send the comforter, and then the comforter will guide us to all truth, and finally to him, to where, like Jeremiah said, in that day everyone will know, from the least to the greatest, everyone will know the Father, know God, whatever you want to call that name, but everyone. But we're not there yet. So individually, all we can do is go, okay, I don't know the answer to this, but if our ego is what it does, the reason there's 55,000 churches, they all feel they're the right church. Well, I mean, just logically, that's impossible. It's either one or none. That other than that, there aren't two right churches. There's only one or there's none. And this argument goes all the way back to Paul fighting with the 12 apostles, and Paul won, right? Whether you feel Paul, brother Paul, is what Peter called him, but if it doesn't matter. What we are trying to do is get down to the rock. And if we want to learn as a little child, we've got to be willing to go down and make bare everything and then look at it. And the people in Nazareth, they couldn't look, even though Jesus himself, the Son of the Father, the one that done all the miracles, they knew he'd done all the miracles, but they wanted him to do a trick in front of them. And he said, no, but I'll read. And he starts to read. And when he reads, they're like, he stops reading about the destructions that would come in the last days. He stops there in Isaiah. And then they get mad because they want Rome gone. So their mindset is this, and his is completely different. So while we're doing this and trying to figure out where Jerusalem is, it's a good opportunity for us to test ourselves. Are we willing to let these things go? Are we willing to really look at it and look at the text and let the text speak? Let the book of Jubilees speak. Let Aristeas speak. And then try to come together with all the facts and see which place might be the place. Because even if I could say, okay, I know for sure that it's in this area, let's say South Sudan, or it's in Ethiopia, I know it's here, or Kenya, then at some point someone's got to go put a spade in the ground and dig, right? Because then we'll know. Because when they put a spade in the ground in the Levant, they found a village of 700 people with no palaces, no nothing, not even, they said that King David or Solomon must have been like a chieftain, like at most, like a nothing. And yet the Bible tells us a whole other story about Solomon and David. So then you go, and that's where their ego of the world comes in, because they can't move the pin from the Levant down to Kenya area somewhere. They can't do it, because if they do that, that breaks everything. And that means that the people of Africa were actually the ones that gave them their book and their white Jesus and all that. That's not possible. They can't do it. So they'll call the text a fake or a myth or a exaggeration or whatever you want to call the word, and they'll say the letter of Aristeas is just made up. He made that up for whatever reason, rather than dealing with the text. I saw a really good video on a channel called Jesus Words Only. He did a video, Doug's his name. He did a great video on this woman found a 200-year-old, I think it wasn't in Greek, it was a Syriac or something, but the translation of Matthew. And it says in that version that Joseph was the father of Jesus. Well, that's like, to Christians, but she changed out. They changed out when they found it. As he translated, they can now show that they changed it to suit what we accept, rather than going with what the document said. And that's where our ego gets in the way, right? Because the first Christians, the Ebionites and the Nazarenes, those groups, what did they do? They didn't believe in the virgin birth, but that came in later. It was added later. So when we're looking at and trying to sort out these things, trying to sort out the Bible, sort of in Africa, and sort out the places and all those things, please, as much as possible, try, like me, the Gentile, to put aside our egos, try to put aside. It's so very hard to do. Because when archaeology, like I said, shows no walls in Jericho, no evidence of Moses in the Sinai, the Jerusalem teeny village, no gold, no mountains, no gushing springs, no nothing, can't support a million, not even 100,000 people, no massive herds, no grasslands, no milk and honey, no lions, all that. Uh, as it says here, a child does not say, well, then the Bible must be a myth. That's what adults say with egos. That is what ego says. That is what tradition says. That is what scholars trapped in the Levant say. That's so true. A child simply says, maybe you were looking in the wrong place. And I was writing this up last night. I was thinking of the movie with the Skywalker, and I think it's one of the second, fourth, fifth or sixth movie where they can't find it, not Luke, but Obi-Wan Kenobi can't find a planet system. And the teacher says to all the kids, well, where must it be? It should be here. And then the kid says, well, somebody must have removed it. It's like, well, of course, the adults couldn't see it because the adults were saying, no, it was never there. It's not there. But then the children are going like, yeah, there's a spot here. It must have been removed. And there's still the adults going, no, that can't be. You know, who would have done that? And so it's hard for us as an adult to see, very extremely hard. But I encourage you to do so because the joy of finding and seeking and the pearl of great price comes through giving all the garbage up, all of it, starting from scratch and start building on the rock one piece at a time. But as long as we, in my opinion, as long as we still hold on to one place in Africa is for sure the place, then we'll never find, never. I mean, in anything. I believe that. I've gone through it myself. What do they call it? The poor in spirit. When you see down to the, I know nothing, like Moses, like I'm down to here, poor in spirit, and then mourning for the fact that we're so far from the Father. When I realized I wasn't keeping even the first commandment, right? And I had a church between me and the Father, and I had leaders between me and the Father, and I had all that. I'm going like, I'm not even keeping the first commandment. And I know today's Sunday, but I don't celebrate. I celebrate on Thursday now on the lunar Sabbath. But I wasn't keeping that 3 years ago. I was keeping the Sunday Sabbath, and Adventists keep the Saturday Sabbath. But try talking to an Adventist that the Sabbath of Saturday was chosen by Constantine, just like the Sunday was chosen. He just did it with the Hebrew leaders at the time, the rabbis at the time. But no, it was a lunar Sabbath, right? And so once we start to look, we start to say, oh, I'm really far from where I should be with the Father. And so when I started looking at, I started using the names like Yeshua and Yahuwah and all those names. And then I realized where they came from. They came from the Gentiles that pretend they are the people that are of the Bible. And so I'm not using their scriptures. I'm not a chance. Because when I see what the Septuagint has and what they removed in our Bibles, all the witnesses of Jesus that are in the Old Testament, like 200 things they changed. They literally changed our Old Testament that we have, because whoever, King James and all those guys, when they decided to use the Old Testament, they didn't use the Septuagint, they used the Masoretic Hebrew text. But that had been altered time, altered seasons, as it says in the scriptures. They did, and yet that's what we trust it as sola scriptura, and it's a fraud. And so we go back to the Septuagint. Is it perfect? No, it was translated into Greek from the original, but we don't have the original. There is no original at all. The Greek text is the oldest by 1,200 years over the Hebrew text, and it shows the alterations. That's what I love about it. I'm going to do a video on that for sure, because it shows the alterations that our Bibles are completely corrupted by men, right? We don't think so, but they're completely corrupted. When you look at the Septuagint, the Masoretic text says one of the scriptures about the Gentiles, trying to help and come in, they changed it to Moab, right? When it said Gentiles clearly. And that's what's quoted in the New Testament. So the New Testament writers that are using their Old Testament of the time, which was the Septuagint, they quote one thing, but in our Bibles, it's gone, changed into Moab instead of Gentiles. And when it says that Jesus, something about, I think it was about being blind, man born blind, or anyway, all the different miracles, right? Or being pierced in the hands and the feet. Well, they took that out of their Masoretic text, so it's not in our Old Testament, in our Bibles, about being pierced in the hands and the feet in the same scripture. But that scripture, word for word, is in the Septuagint. So when you start to see how men have been playing around with things, then you go, that's fine. I accept that men play around with things. They do. But the issue is our ego gets involved. And once our ego is involved, men are liable to change scripture because they don't want it or remove books. We look at the books from Ethiopia, the Jubilees and the Maccabees and the Edris and all the books that were removed out of the Bibles. Now Catholics kept some and Protestants removed others, but men made those decisions. When people say, "Oh, the Bible's the Word of God, cover to cover, and never been touched, it handle it with care," I'm going, like, it's not even close. There is the Word of God is in there, yes, but the words of men are in there too. Change things have been changed and altered, and if you can find the alterations, fantastic, great. Like Joseph being the father of. I mean, once you start to think about it, you start to go, okay, it makes sense. It says that Jesus was born of the lineage of David, the seed of David. Well, the only way you get the seed is through the father, which means Joseph, and they track the lineage of Joseph back. But then they say, well, no, he came to, it's the Mary lineage they're talking about because of the virgin birth and all that stuff. But the virgin birth comes from the esoteric groups, right? Jesus was born, or Ishu, or whatever you want to call him, he was born like the rest of us. And yet he wasn't like the rest of us, right? But be that as it may, ego does not seek at all. It cannot. It cannot seek any more than a narcissist can ever seek to change. They can't. They can go and sit with a therapist, but they won't change. You can listen to online about narcissism because I've dealt with that in my life, but not me, but brought up that way. But when you start to see they can't change, so what they can't. So if they can't change, it's ego, whatever, it gets hardened, and not just for narcissists, but all of us. We get hardened in our ego. Ego does not ask, it does not seek, it does not knock, it doesn't, because if we aren't willing to be open to what could be the truth, it goes against what we believe. Take any, I don't know, let's say a Seventh day Adventist. And I go, yeah, I want you to actually, it's a lunar Sabbath. Well, they'll go, not a chance. Oh, and they won't consider it. Most. There'll be a few that would, but most won't consider it because that's where they're stuck. And if you go to a Catholic and say, no, these people aren't saints and that's not this, and Mary wasn't like that, and that's not how it happened, it's no. But if you took a child of any of these people that was 2 or 3 or 4 years old and started to teach them the truth, then they could come around. They could, but their parents, of course, are going to teach them the opposite, but just fine. A child says, show me the evidence. Let me see the land. Let me compare the animals, the rivers, the mountains, the agriculture, the pastoral culture, the milk, the honey, the day length, the travel routes, the destruction prophecies. Let me put all the clues on the table like a puzzle, put them all together, not just the ones that fit my tradition, because they don't have the tradition, of course. And then when we get that, honestly, humbly, without ego, the evidence begins to point in a direction, not with 100% certainty, not with dogmatism, but with clarity. I'll share this about myself personally. I was brought up in an atheist family, and I was agnostic up until I was in my early 20s. And then I started to read, and I read and started to read and found, I didn't find God in the way that people find God, but I knew that these things were real, absolutely. But I'd never read the Bible in my life. So I had no preconceived notion of any of it. I didn't even know the stories of the Bible, really. I mean, I'm sure I'd heard of the flood or Noah or something maybe, but I didn't know any. I didn't know, never read it, never opened it, never read a page in my life, nor had it read to me. And so I'm going like, in a sense, it's easier that way. But then I entered into a religion, and then now 5 years ago I left that religion. Same thing. It has great people, great things, as all religions do. But I had to say, no, I'm not following man anymore. I started to see the occult in my church. Actually, almost all churches have it anyway, because it's not the real, it's the other. But anyway, once you start to see it, then you say, okay, I'm willing to separate. It's painful. It's hard giving up your friends, your culture, your traditions. But are we willing to be as a little child, as the Savior said? So none of these things prove the exact location, but it does show where to look. It shows us where the evidence gathers. It shows us where the text breathes. It shows us where the Bible makes sense again. And that is all we are doing. We're learning to look at things like a little child. And that, I think, is why Jesus said only a few will ever find the way, not because it's hidden, but because they have to drop ego at the doorstep and then start the Beatitudes, poor in spirit, knowing nothing except you're separated from God, mourning for that and for your sins. Then that brings meekness. Moses was the most meek man, yet he was a general and ran all the people. So it was, meekness doesn't mean a wimp, but meekness being teachable about everything. Even Jethro came and helped him afterwards with the troubles, but teachable, being teachable, then desiring righteousness, then follow. This is the path of the disciple, I believe, the Beatitudes. Then following righteousness, then becoming what do you call it? Stopping people from fighting with one another, peacekeeper, and then pure in spirit, and then what comes after being pure in spirit? Persecution, right? Because then you become a light, and as you become a light, then all the rest that are following the other thing in the churches, they'll start to persecute. Not because you have to even say anything. They start to see you're different. You're not acting like us. You're different. You're excommunicated, right? So little key concepts. It says for your closing, I do want to talk about this quickly. Little child humility. If you can get that, then your life is saved. Cognitive dissonance. That breaks your ego, and you have to face it. We'll all go through. I went through it brutally. Jericho contradiction. Jerusalem contradiction, the Sinai contradiction, the pastoral culture, milk and honey, Shem land and jubilees, Canaan stealing land, equatorial day length, the letting the evidence speak. Okay, then I asked this. These are where all of you in your comments, are not you, but all my commenters said, Jebel Marra, Mount Kenya, Yeha and the Tigray, Aksum, South Africa, Lesotho, Namibia, Botswana. Some people suggest the lost city of the Kalahari, then the Abuguri, Ghana, Northeast Nigeria, Kongo region, Wenzori, Tbilisi, North America, Utah, some people say. These are all the ones that my users have said favor the place of Jerusalem. I said, can we evaluate all of these in a table? Okay, and it did. It gave it to me in a table. The Jebel Marra in Sudan, it meets all the criteria. Mount Kenya, all the criteria. Yeha, all the criteria. Axum, all the criteria. Wenzari, all those criteria. The Congo, then we get to Renzwari, all the criteria. We're talking within the area that of Egypt, within that where the in that area where they could have come from Alexandria, Aristeas. What this doesn't deal with is the destruction of Jerusalem, but we're talking near the equator, having highlands, having mountains, having rivers, milk and honey, being on the equator, all those things. And then you get down to Namibia, it has some of them. South Africa has some of them. South Africa has about half. Namibia has a bit. The lost city of the Kalahari has the hills. And then you go down. Okay, then why East Africa fits better? Okay, because of the mountains, the gushing springs, the massive pastoral herds, the milk abundance, the honey abundance, equatorial day length, the 12 days, hours in a day, Aristeas travel, the biblical animals, and on and on. And then it goes through why they fail, of course. And then I did ask another question. Can we take the top 5 and look at the other factors that we needed? So I went through the 5 factors, the top factors. And then I said, let's look at some other factors. Okay, so we took those five areas, okay, that I mentioned. Okay, then I brought in some other things. Eden and Shem's land, about being beautiful. Then it best matches Mount Kenya, the Rwenzori Mountains, the Axum Yeha Ethiopia area, and Jebel Marra. Okay, and then I'll go through. I don't want to go through all of this; take too much time. Okay, I want to get down here. See if I can get down here. Okay, then I asked it. Yeha and Axum are highly likely tied to Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, but by Josephus, not one stone issue becomes a problem. Because we have an issue is clearly they are ruins. Yeha and Exum both are ruins. And that doesn't mean if we believe the one stone not upon another, down to the foundations in the whole city and the whole area, there shouldn't be even ruins left. There should be nothing. And it says this is a critical refinement. It's one of your audience must understand if they are going to see as a little child. because you are correct. Both those places, they do not fit the Josephus destruction requirement or the one stone upon another prophecy. Then this is decisive criterion. Okay. So again, yes, they had all these places. I believe, yes, I do believe they're tied into biblical Solomonic type stuff. But do I believe that they are Jerusalem? I'm not so certain. I don't believe that for myself just because of this issue. Josephus and Jesus said, not one stone upon another. So we shouldn't find any ruins of a church or of a temple, of anything. It should be gone, wiped off the map. So no standing, Jerusalem must be completely erased, no standing ruins, no preserved temples, no monumental structures, no visible city layout, no archaeological continuity, no stone stacked, no recognizable ancient city. It should be a heap of ruins, a desolation, a haunt of jackals, plowed like a field, and uninhabited afterwards. This is not Yeha, and it is not Axum. Both of those places have standing temples, standing pillars, standing walls, preserved foundations, visible da 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 da. I think you get the idea. And this is exactly why your little child teaching matters. A child looks at Yeha and Axum and says, wow, these are amazing ruins. Maybe this is Jerusalem. It's like in North America, but he looks at the Mexican ruins and go, wow, that must be the greater ruins than America had. Well, they plowed under most of the North American ruins long ago. But when you pull all the evidence together, Josephus and Jesus and Aristeas and Jubilees and the pastoral and the milk and honey, and put it all together, Yeha and Axum cannot be Jerusalem. Because the ego says, I like Axum or I like Yeha, I want it to be there. But a child says, if the stones are still standing, then Jesus' prophecy is not fulfilled, nor Josephus' words, if you want to consider them as well. So this cannot be Jerusalem. And this is humility to say, it doesn't prove any of the places I'm going to talk about are, but in my opinion, those two places get disqualified based on that. Now, if you're from that area, or that's what you believe, then maybe please in the comments, let us know what you think and why you think that. Okay, Mount Kenya region, very high fit. No known ancient city standing, massive mountains, pastoral culture, milk and honey, equatorial, Aristeas radius, biblical animals, Eden-like geography, destruction possible or plausible. They're in Zwari, same kind of thing, glacial rivers, and there's snow, of course, in both these places, that kind of thing at times of the year. And then the Jebel, you can look at that up. I'm not going to go through all of that. So Yeha and Axum are beautiful ruins, but that is exactly the problem. Whether we like Jerusalem, the one that people think is Jerusalem today, it has ruins. It has Wailing Walls. It has ruins. They've dug up the ruins. There's still ruins in the area. So that disqualifies it by those things. But it also disqualifies anything that has a ruin in Africa that we can find, unless all the thing is, if we just find up a bunch of turned up stones and nothing else, then yes. But if it's got an actual foundations and stones upon another, then that probably is going to be eliminated if we're going to look at it with our eyes open. So then we have to look elsewhere. It says in the Bible, I'm asking again, it says in the Bible that Jerusalem will take her Sabbaths and will be wiped from memory. Lost, it says, and the Gentiles will walk the land. Okay? And here it says is your final refinement that you're looking for, the part that ties everything together and shows your viewers why Jerusalem must be lost, hidden, erased, and forgotten. This is the moment, and the reason I'm reading from the AI, I don't write, I use the AI like I'm doing here to come up with things. And then I take that and then I use that, rewrite it in my words, and then I do my presentations. But I'm doing it this way because I want you to see how AI can help you as you are using it too. You can see how it only brings in, it didn't tell these things. I have to bring up the points and ask it. Then it analyzes that and what you've already done and gives you the answers. It says the prophetic text and Josephus and the archaeology of the Levant together show the audience what it means to see like a little child. Jerusalem must be lost because the scripture says it must be lost. Forgotten, wiped from memory, taking its Sabbaths, desolate, haunt of jackals, no stone upon another, walked on by the Gentiles. Doesn't mean the Gentiles are literally walking on each stone, but that the land is controlled now by the Gentiles. The people of the land are gone, and the people that are there, most of them, I mean, if you look at Kenya, who runs Kenya? Well, it's the British. Who runs South Africa? Or in other parts of, like over in West Africa, it's the French or the Belgians, So the Gentiles have been walking the land for a long time. And even if people of Ham come down and live in the land, they're still Gentiles. They're just not the Gentiles from Europe, but still Gentile is anybody that's not of the 12 tribes. Even some of Shem are actually Gentiles in the terms of the covenant of Abraham. Okay. So this is not symbolic. It's not poetic. It is not metaphor. It is a geographical prophecy. So if we take the Bible to be literal, which is what I do, yes, there are errors, of course. I will show them in another video, but that doesn't mean we can't use it for what it is. Of course we can. Jerusalem will take her Sabbaths. It will rest. It will lie fallow. The land will be uninhabited. The land will be unused. The land will be forgotten. So it cannot be the Levant because it's been continuously inhabited for thousands of years. Any ruin, even in Africa, that's had people living there since, what, it can't be considered. Wiped from memory. No one will know where it was. No one will preserve its name. No one will preserve its ruins. No one will preserve its location. So it cannot be the Levant or Jerusalem of our day. The not one stone upon another, we've already talked about that. Can't be Yeha, Axum, and it cannot be the Levant. All three have standing ruins. Just look at the Wailing Wall and all those different ruins. Digging it up. When they dug it up, Josephus says you couldn't tell that any humans had ever lived there. So talking total erasure, total leveling, total destruction, and total disappearance, and also taking the people away out of the land. They were taken away out of the land. So yes, there are probably some of the tribes of Israel that are still bits and pieces that were left in and around wherever the Holy Land was, in Kenya, let's say, in that area. Of course, you'll find here and there, but the bulk of the people, let's say 95% of the people, were taken away by the Romans and sold as lots escaped to West Africa, and then they went with the Moors up into Spain and all that kind of thing. But that's for another video. But it cannot be the Levant, and it can't be Yahoo or Axum. Gentiles will walk the land. So outsiders outside of the covenant will walk the land. They will trample it. They will claim it. They will rename it, like Lake Victoria. And outsiders will not know what the land is, most of them, right? Do I believe that the Vatican? Of course I believe they do. I believe lots of the elites of the world know exactly who the people are and exactly likely where the land is. But they are against the Father. They aren't going to, they're not going to give you reparations, right? Don't think of, forget it. The only way you're getting reparations is the way Moses got reparations, in my opinion. And that is destruction until they just say, take it, just leave us alone, leave us to live, and take everything we have. That'll be the reparations. It's not going to be by, oh yeah, the government's going to come up with a bill and give you, $1 million or that kind of thing. You have to understand they don't like you, right? They know the ones up at the very top of the elites. So don't blame all the people that are like me. I didn't know. People don't know. Most people don't. Even the ones that had slaving families in the South and all that, they know they did some bad stuff, but they don't know what the people that run our world know. They know. Of course, people always say, yeah, you get into the archives, you could find, of course, but they're not going to let you into the archives, right? Outsiders will claim it, outsiders will rename it, and outsiders will not know where it is. Originally renamed Alia Capitoliana was Jerusalem. It was already a fort. Helena, the mother of Constantine, as we know, named all the holy places: Golgotha, Mount Zion, Temple Mount, Bethlehem, Jericho. They just named things. Found a cave, here you go, that'll be it. But the Gentiles didn't know, and it shows up shockingly when archaeologists now digging up, and everything is like, that doesn't match, that doesn't match. Capernaum doesn't match, Nazareth doesn't match, Bethlehem doesn't match. None of it matches what it should be. I shouldn't say none, that's too strong. It just doesn't match. Just generally speaking, it doesn't match because it wasn't the real land, just names placed on a map. Okay, I want to skip down here. I think we've done enough on that. The real Jerusalem must be in a region where ruins can be swallowed by mountains, foundations can be erased by vegetation, cities can be overtaken by forests, stones can be buried by volcanic soil or by just deposits. Memory can be lost. Gentiles never preserved the name. No continuous habitation exists. No Roman renaming occurred. No medieval pilgrimage existed. I actually think the Romans on purpose got rid of it. They didn't want it. When they're going to make the new land, they made sure I believe no maps, no nothing was taken. That's another video I want to get into about the Romans, because that's fascinating. So that's not the Levant, it's not Ethiopian, it's not Axum area, okay? So while your top candidates, Mount Kenya, Rwenzori, and Jebel Marra remain the strongest. They are equatorial, pastoral, milk-rich, honey-rich, mountainous, river-rich, Eden-like, within Aristaeus radius, full of biblical animals, capable of supporting millions, capable of hiding ruins, and capable of erasing foundations and capable of losing memory. They are the only regions that satisfy all the criteria. And I had one other thing. I guess I don't have it here. One of my viewers, I'm not going to be able to put it up here. I'll add it to another video I'm going to do. In the comments, when I posted I was going to do this video, he did an incredible review of parts of Kenya and said this place is this, and this is that, and that's this. And it's in the comments. You can go and take a look at it, of where I posted it in the community section. But just realize that for us, this is for me, it's an exciting journey. But to be as a child and be able to discover, is the earth a globe or is it flat? Are there dinosaurs or were there dragons, really live dragons, as the scriptures say? What were these animals? What happened at the flood? Was the flood global or was it not? What happened with the Nephilim and all the stuff before the flood? But where we get lost, and I see people get so lost, they start talking about Neanderthals, or that all the white people are Esau. That's just crazy talk, right? Yes, Edom or Esau, some may have migrated, some of them, or been taken out of Africa, because they're African, right? They weren't European. And yes, some of them may have made it mixed in with the Pharisees, and that's quite possible, like with Herod and all that. But to say that every person in the world is of a certain group, I think we still have to use our head. And Neanderthals, if there even was such a thing, which I don't really believe. But anyway, let's say there is Neanderthal, but that's before the flood. That's 10,000, 20, 30,000 years ago. So whoever came through the flood, the 8 souls, if you believe in the Bible, 8 souls came off that ship. And what went in that ship are only the people that the Father allowed to be saved from the billions or millions that died. So to think that they brought through Neanderthals hiding in with the camels, or those kind of things, or Nephilim and all that, that's just, we start getting into those things. It's nice to think about some things, but some things take us down rabbit holes that are good rabbit holes, and something take us down rabbit holes that are just waste our time. So just I hope this video has helped you, not to pinpoint. I will say that for me, I believe that Mount Kenya is Mount Zion. I do believe that. Where the rest of it all happened, I don't know. I did a video on the Omo River possibly being the Jordan, Sea of Galilee possibly being Lake Victoria, but I have no proof of those things. It could have been other lakes there. I don't know. That's why it's so lovely having all these people that comment on the ground, like this fellow that put down. I've got to go search out all the things that he said and start looking at that and analyzing it, because if it's the excitement of the chase. But if we feel it's my way and it is absolutely Namibia and that's Jerusalem, well, then we're stuck. At least we're never going to learn about where the Jerusalem is, because if your place is wrong, you'll never find the right one. Now, if you happen to be lucky and that is the right one, then great, good for you. But if we want to find the truth of everything, which we're supposed to do, and that's what the Savior told us to do, all truth, and it'll set you free, then we can't be stuck on certain truths that we hold dear and won't let go, right? Like that the Bible is a perfect book when it's not. I'm going to definitely do a video in the next week on that, because it's so fascinating to see what the Masoretic text or our Bibles have removed from them. I'm going to show each and every one of the ones that are important, so you can see that men tampered with the Bible. So it's not a perfect book. It's a great book. It's fantastic. It's the only thing we have. It's the word. And so grateful for the Ethiopians that kept the scriptures. So now we have all these other things to be added. But when people see the book of Enoch, do you think that's the real book of Enoch that came from Enoch all the way down through, Melchizedek, Abraham, and down. And, people put the name Enoch on it at some point. But is it 200 or 300 years before Christ, or 1,000 years, or 500 years? I have no idea. But someone used the name Enoch, and that's fine. And maybe the actual tale did come down from Enoch at some point by verbal word of mouth, and someone called it that. But we have been using the texts as texts, and I think once we come to understand that, that's why discernment and living the commandments and getting the Spirit is so crucial. So then we can start to see for ourselves. So let me just look quickly if there's any other questions. Anybody still here, or just me babbling along? Okay, I'll take a couple. If anybody has any questions, I'll. Wrong. Gentiles are defined in Genesis. Gentiles are European. No, they're not just European. Sorry. Okay, Japheth is all the way from China, all the way through, and a lot of the Indians are mixed in with Ham, and there's also Shem mixed in there. Lots of Shemite people came over to the Americas, and then there's lots of people that are Gentiles, and they're also mixed with Ham, or Shemites mixed with Gentiles. Who knows? There were black. Watch some channels. Kurameo is a great channel if you want to. He reads books that are 300 and 400 years ago that are fascinating, like that King Charles of Scotland, that he was black, right? And the black Irish, and talking. There's things we don't know. And the Moors, I'm going to definitely do a video. Someone asked me to do that on the Moors, that they were, a lot of them were Jewish, of course, and they came up, but were they all the Moors? No. So they were mixed in with Berber, other peoples. But the 4,000 years is a lot of mixing, right? A lot of mixing. I think if you want to find pure bloodlines, then go to the elites. I think everybody else is mixed up to some degree. But do I think that there are true people that comes from the lineage of Abraham? Absolutely. And have they been scattered all the way from China to America? Yes, I believe so. I think they're even further than that. I'm a flat earth person, so I think that who knows where the 12 lost tribes are. I just don't know. I think we have to be open to all kinds of things. But once we start saying that the Gentiles are only the people of Europe, I mean, it's crazy. I'm sorry. I know you're watching, but Europe wasn't even nothing at the time of the Bible being written in Africa. It was written about African people. Do you think they were talking about people they didn't even hardly know Greece. So you think they were talking about people up in Scandinavia? They didn't probably even know they even existed. The Phoenicians might have, because they traveled around a lot. But, I think we have to our worldview is not their worldview. The video I just did on Africa, what was the name of Africa? And one commenter made a great comment. She said that the people in Africa, they didn't really name their own continent. It was the Europeans and the others that started naming continents, probably because they wanted to conquer them. But the people in Africa, like the Bantu means the people, didn't say, they knew there were other people, but it's like the land. They called their land, the land was named for sacred values and stuff like that, but they didn't have a name for the whole continent in that sense. But maybe they did. But the issue is, our worldview comes from where we are now. But all Europeans weren't even Europeans 1,000 years ago. I mean, when the Romans went and conquered up in there, the Roman armies went up with peoples that were from, even people, they had Nubians, they had people from Africa in their armies. I mean, people were going everywhere. And Spain wasn't always as white as it is now. When the Moors were in there, and then of course, the Inquisition put them into slavery and sent them to Americas and everywhere else. But we're talking about very, very complex things, very complex things. And I just think when we start saying all of this group or this, and all of this group or this, and all this, it's like it's so simplification that I think we lose so much. People have been moving a lot. Like I said, in North America, when they found Ethiopian looking people, that means they came from, in my opinion, Africa 2 or 3 to 4,000 years ago. Who knows when they came, right? The Olmecs, when did they come from Africa? I think they came from Africa probably. But, at the dispersion of the tower, people went everywhere, everywhere. And so I don't know. Yes, I've read the Book of Mormon. Of course I have. And at some point I'll get into that as well. But that's a tricky one as well, because it's a anyway, the secret groups took over that religion as well completely. It's interesting that there are more scientific proof of the Hebrew stones were found all over the place. Yeah, absolutely. I think, and they hid a ton of stuff in the Americas. I saw one of the mounds in America on a channel. It was fascinating. There was a mound that's been destroyed, but it had an elephant in the middle of the mound. So the mound was built around a mound of an elephant that was a perfect elephant, and all around it, it had a circular mound built around it. There's another one that's a snake up in Ohio, I think, and stuff. So yes, there's all kinds of remains in Americas. I mean, there's more remains in a sense in Americas than what's been dug up almost anywhere else, but they've hidden most of it. Most of the cities in the US have been built on cities. They destroyed the ruins that were there and built cities over them. You can look at the old, there's, I'll try to find the books. Probably Kurameo has handled that. You could look on his channel, but the old books, they show the architectural drawings of, like Pittsburgh and all these places along the rivers. Wherever cities are now, there were cities generally there before. But when they came in, they wiped out the ruins. Whatever was there, they wiped out and built new cities. And I said, look up, it's fascinating. Look up Mound City, which is Kansas City. They had a mound there that was human. It took them years to destroy the mound. They just kept digging and digging and digging until it was gone. Because, like I said, they didn't want the Smithsonian is the great, it's like the Vatican, it hides everything, right? But you can see these newspapers back in the 1800s where they're finding 9 and 10 and 12-foot skeletons in the Americas in these mounds as they dig them up, but they're all carted away, right? Because, and you don't see them in the Smithsonian being displayed. So what have they done with them? Well, just like the art, they don't want that out. They don't, it goes against the greater narrative of the colonial powers, right? Or the ruling elites. I don't believe that from 70 AD, everybody forgot. I don't believe Romans have forgotten where Jerusalem was. Not at all. I believe it's in the Vatican for sure. They know where they don't hide, they don't forget things like that. They may change what they allow out to the public, but of course they know. If we don't believe, anyway, let's just say the fellow that tempted the Savior in the desert, and the one that, remember when the Savior was saying, casting the spirits out, and they said, "Have you come before your time?" Right? Well, they know they have a time, and they have people that weren't up to the Savior's, level that would say, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." They'll just say, "Show me where I sign the line on the dotted line, and I'll do whatever I want because then I can get power and glory and all that stuff." Of course, that's human nature. But do you think the people? There's no way that the people of Africa have been treated so poorly, and the African Americans have been treated so poorly without someone knowing who they were. It doesn't, it begs what is it, credulity. If it's they have to have known. I'm sorry, I think they have to have known. That doesn't mean that I didn't know growing up in Canada. I didn't know anything, right? I mean, where I was in Canada, there were some people that were Black Africans that had moved up there, and they lived in a place called Africville, and then the city destroyed their houses and relocated into another place, which was terrible. But really weren't hardly any African American or African Canadian people living where I lived. What they brutalized were the French Canadians. The French Canadians were my wife is French Canadian. The Acadians, the English stole their land, literally stole their land, sent them on ships. A lot of the ships people died at sea. They died of starvation. A lot of them went to Louisiana from Canada because it was the English wanted the land, the ruling power of the world, and they wanted the French out. And the French actually got along much better with the native people than the English did. And they intermarried with them a lot more too. Um, Anything else? Any other questions about anybody? No, I will do a video on the Book of Mormon in the next few weeks, probably. Yeah. I'm just not sure how to handle it because it's so trashed. I mean, Brigham Young, Joseph Smith ran for president. People won't believe this, but he ran for president to free the slaves in all of America and give land that was in the West to compensate the landowners. And he was killed while he was by, I believe, Brigham Young personally, but anyway, he was killed by, not personally, but a pact, a group of the order, the society, and they took over, right? And that's, Joseph Smith and his whole family. It wasn't just him. He had 3 of his brothers as well that were killed as well. Don Carlos first. Samuel was killed by poison a month after his two other brothers were shot. You know, so he was running to free. He actually was part of from what I understand, I'm going to do some more study on that, but he was a part of the Underground Railroad of getting people up. And the reason that Joseph got in so much trouble was because he was young, but they were in Missouri, and Missouri was a slave state, and he brought in all these people and he was teaching against slavery, right? And the people, Brigham and those guys, were pro-slavery. So of course you can start to see where things add up. No one's really researched into that because they don't care. They don't want to know. Everybody wants to they want to. It's like saying the Bible is Catholic. It's crazy, right? It's like the Book of Mormon is a stolen book. It belongs to the native Indians of the Americas, if it's true at all, right? If it's not true, then fine. But if it's true, it doesn't belong to the white people in Utah. It belongs to the Native Americans. And I watch a couple channels, Judah, and another guy, and they use the Book of Mormon and read from it, and that's fantastic. But that doesn't mean they're going to become Mormons, because that's a cultish thing. But the book itself is, of course, valuable for anybody who wants to read it, but just don't go joining any churches of any church in the world, in my opinion. And that means to me also the Hebrew Israelites, all of it. If it's a group, stay away. That's my opinion. All groups, everyone. I'm not making a group. I don't want any groups. I won't participate in any group of any sort, whether it be religion or politics. I don't want anything to do with any of it. Right? It goes against the first commandment to have no other judges. The Savior said, don't call anyone master, don't have any teachers, don't do anything. Even the apostles, their job was to go out and spread the gospel. Jesus didn't set up a church. He taught people and left it up to them to go and, do their thing. Do you believe the giants are hybrids between human and angel, or just regular tall human? Oh, that's a great question. I believe there's two types. I love the stuff. If you get into some interest, you're probably into that, right? But I believe that there are some of the things that we call mountains now that were actually tree stumps. I do believe that from before the flood. I believe before the flood, the people were much larger. Maybe there was more oxygen. I don't know, but they lived longer. And I think we have no clue before the flood what happened. I believe when they came across on the flood, I believe the people were probably taller. That's my opinion. Just my opinion. I believe they were probably 20 feet high, probably. Who knows? But I think over time, as we see the ages quickly going down to 120 years. We also see I believe the people's heights went down to some degree as well. And some groups, like we read in the Bible, of course, Goliath and that group, but others, I think that people may have gotten shorter at different times, but there are skeletons found in the Americas. And I believe they came from the Tower of Babel. And that's what the Book of Mormon says. But if that's the case, then there were 15, 16-foot individuals in the Americas living here, right? Then 8 and 10 and 12, 14 footers. And they were traveling all over the world at the time. So I don't know. It's interesting how the Hebrew Israelite tribes went in total worshiping in the Americas, which makes me believe that there was Northern Kingdom, Southern Kingdom wanted to get a way out of. I think, from what I've read everywhere, the Lord loved the 12 tribes, loved them. They were the apple of his eye. But as it says, when they started to choose kings, right, the Lord only needed 300 men with Gideon to defeat, what, 1,000,000 or 100,000 or whatever it was. He didn't need, they just needed to have faith. But once they wanted a king, he said, to Samuel, they haven't rejected you, they've rejected me. And I know they build up King David. I don't build up Solomon at all. I see that when they started going down that road, you get very quickly to Jezebel, right? You get very quickly to worshiping Baal and Asherah. And we know that when people have had the truth and then they go away from it, they're worse off than if they'd never gone away. So I think the tribes, they weren't protected anymore. So the lost tribes were taken away, and then Judah was taken away to Babylon, and then the Greeks, then the Romans, but there were still always good people among the 12 and then among Judah. It's just that the bad ones outweighed the good ones, which is what you see in Jesus' day when he wept for Jerusalem. Yet there were hundreds, if not thousands, that were following him. But out of, let's say, 1,000,000 or 500,000 or however many there were, it was still a very small group that were still willing to follow the things of righteousness. Most were following like the Nazarenes and the Pharisees, that kind of thing. Yeah. Any more questions here? No, the Americas are fascinating. I have, we just, I mean, just that's why it's so difficult to do, especially like the Caribbean, right? People were taken, from what I read, from the Americas as slaves before they ever came from Africa. They were taken, the native people that were probably African American looking people were taken as slaves out of the Americas down to the Caribbean to work there. And then some of the people that were sent over by the popes from Spain, and they're the black African American Moors or whatever, the Jews that wouldn't be conversos, or they were taken by ship first to the Portugal colonies in Africa, and then shipped. A lot of them went to Brazil, and then they end up moving out of there, and they went to the Caribbean. So once you start seeing all these people, like it's like a total revolving door. It's incredible, right? So I mean, of all the places where the mixing happened, the Caribbean to me have the most mixing, right? The most, I mean, incredible amount of mixing, because of they needed slaves for the sugar plantations, I guess, at the time, and that kind of thing. So they kept bringing people, and they would die, and then they bring more people, and I mean, it's terrible, right? It's terrible what happened to the people. But does that mean that they were wicked because their fathers made poor choices? No. But I also don't believe the Canaanites are cursed forever because their parents made poor choices either. I believe we can all, 5 or 6 generations, it says in the scriptures, or 4 or 5 generations. It takes time to change things out. Anyway, I think I'll let it go there. If there's anything more questions, get them on quickly. Other than that, thanks for coming back for the second stream of this crazy live stream. Anyway, thanks, and I'll see you in another video. Take care. Bye-bye. Yeah.